Hey everyone, this is Gene from NYC, and as you can tell by the sound of my voice, I'm feeling a lot better. I don't have a lot of time on this phone. My battery is about to die out, and I have to charge it, and I gotta start storing my videos other places. So anyway, I'm gonna be super brief with this. I just saw a video on Perfection's channel. He's been covering the DBZ stuff with Monica and Vic and all that. But this isn't about that. This is about actually pro wrestling and the interplay between sex and violence. Now, what do I mean? Apparently, there's this clip going around of an Evo stream. Evo, if you don't know, is a big esports thing, mainly for fighting games. I'm familiar with it through being a lifelong Street Fighter fan, and that's kind of how I know it. And Evo could possibly involve other games. I just know it again through Street Fighter and through being a long-time fan of fighting games, right? So, apparently, DOA6, for those who don't know, DOA is Dead or Alive. It's a fighting game that's been around for, 20-some years, as long as Tekken, as long as Soul Calibur. But it's of the three or four major 3D fighting games that came out in the mid to late 90s, DOA is the one that's noted for its heavy fan service element. Now, every fighting game, especially ones that last a long time, do have an element of fan service, especially when it comes to the women. You look at Street Fighter, you have Chun-Li, and you have Cammy, and you have other female characters that came along in the years, like Elena, like, what's her name, Laura, that they introduced relatively recently, Sea Viper. So, you look at Mortal Kombat, you have, Shiva, who's my favorite character, and she's the one who wears the least clothing. So, believe me, I am not necessarily opposed to fan service or the skimpy outfits. I'm more concerned about, does the outfit fit the character, than I am about the skimpiness, generally speaking. But you look at, again, Kitana, Melina, Shiva, other characters in the Mortal Kombat games. You look at Soul Calibur, you have Taki, and you have Setsuka, and you have Ivy. So, fan service and fighting games go together like peanut butter and jelly. Now, another thing that goes together with fighting games is your resident pro wrestler character. You're not going to find a fighting game, especially one that came out after 1992, when Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat took off, that doesn't have a wrestler. Heck, you can even look at old school beat-em-up games that featured wrestling characters. In fact, one of my favorite games of all time is Streets of Rage 2, and my favorite character in that game was Max, who was a big, super muscular pro wrestler. So the reason I bring all this up is to sort of set the groundwork, right? Give a little history lesson and set the groundwork. Wrestling has always been a part of fighting games. Fan service has always been a part of fighting games. And if you've ever seen a wrestling match, or if you've ever seen combat sports in general, there is something, yes, inherently sexual about it. I wouldn't say overtly sexual for the most part, unless somebody wants it to be overtly sexual. For example, you have wrestling gimmicks, wrestling characters like, say, Goldust, or Sable, or even the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, where the sexiness and the sex appeal, or in the case of Goldust, just sexuality, but from a very creepy standpoint, is part of the character, so it's very overt. But if we're just talking about fighting in and of itself, it's not overtly sexual, but yes, I do think it's fair to say that there is a sexual element to violence, right? You get very close to a person, right? It can actually be, in its own odd way, very intimate. Think, for example, of when, Wolverine stabs somebody with his claws. If you wanted to look at it that way, there is something very primal and very sexual about a, feral wild man taking his claws and piercing and penetrating another person. And the same goes for many wrestling moves. You look at MMA, they're always wrestling and grappling and grabbing each other. You look at boxing, there's the constant clinching, which looks like a very close, tight hug at times. And again, if you look at pro wrestling, right, there's a lot of moves that do look somewhat sexual. There's a lot of holds, right? Where your head or your arm or some other part of your body ends up in between a person's legs. There's moves such as the tombstone pile driver, right? Where you basically end up in a reverse 69, well, in a 69 of sorts. I'm not quite sure there's a reverse for a thing like that. But where, just to do the move properly, yes, you are in a 69, and yes, one person's head is at another person's groin, and it's up and down, right? If you ever seen a tombstone pile driver, if you ever seen the 69, a standing 69, yes, there is something sexual about it. No one denies that. There is something sexual about a power bomb. No one denies that. Fighting in general, again, does have a sexual element to it. No one denies that. If there's two things that people like on a primal level, it's a good fight and a good something else that begins with the letter F. No one denies that. So here's the reason why I'm sort of laying the groundwork here, because apparently there was a stream going on Twitch of DOA6, and there's these two characters. One, I don't know who the characters are because I don't follow DOA like at all. It never interested me. But there's these two characters. One guy is male, wrestler, right? Obvious, he has a singlet on, the whole deal. One's a female character, kind of looks like a succubus or succubus thing, kind of like Morrigan from the Darkstalkers games. That was the kind of like general look or feel. And so you know, the fighting game is starting. You know, they're going back and forth, and there comes a point where the wrestler character gets the girl in a grapple move, and the grapple move seems to be a super over-the-top version of a power bomb. And there comes a point where the character is basically finishing the power bomb super, and someone, I guess whoever is playing, sort of like pauses the character, or pauses the super move at that moment to sort of like mess with the camera, to like play with it. And it's paused in a way that because the guy's landing, right, so he's landing on his butt, the girl's legs are up in the air, and yes, you know, because of the nature of a power bomb, especially one where you're landing on your butt, right? It's different if it's a power bomb where the person doing the power bomb is still standing, but there are what's called sit-out power bombs. A popular example, if you follow pro wrestling, is what's called the Batista bomb. It's a sit-out power bomb. You lift your opponent in the power bomb position, but instead of just throwing them off your shoulders, you actually basically throw your legs out and land on your butt with your legs spread. That's how a sit-out power bomb works. Again, look up the Batista bomb. It's a sit-out power bomb. So I'm running out of breath here. So it's basically paused in this moment where it could, especially if you don't know wrestling, but I think everybody knows at this point knows wrestling, but it's paused at this moment to make it look more sexual than it really is. The person paused it and messed with the camera at the moment where the guy's in the landing position for the sit-out power bomb. So it does look like, from a certain angle, that the guy is performing oral sex on the girl. But of course, again, that's if you look at it out of context. If you look at it in context, you know it's somebody just being silly and immature. So Twitch cuts the stream. Twitch cuts the stream. and I just don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, I understand maybe like blocking maybe that part out, right? But you just cut the whole stream? You just cut the whole stream over that? Okay, first of all, real talk. Have they ever seen pro wrestling? Did they ever watch pro wrestling back during the Attitude Era? Do they know anything just about combat sports in general? Yes, there is something inherently sexual about it. Anybody who's ever watched pro wrestling or played video games knows that there is this again, interplay of sex and violence, interplay of violence and fan service. You cannot find a fighting game that doesn't have it. So, I really do think it was an overreaction on their part to cut the stream. I understand maybe quickly cutting away from that if they were that concerned, but to cut the whole stream? Really, for that? Again, watch any Powerbomb compilation. Yes, if you decide to pause it and spin the camera around, you can make it look like anything that you want. You cannot erase the inherent sexual nature of just violence in general. Anybody could do that with any other game. Some people are saying, well, you know, it's because it's DOA, it's fan service. In my opinion, boo-hooey. You could take Street Fighter, play as Zangief, have him do a power bomb on say, Armika, and you could do the same thing. You could take King from Tekken, have him do a power bomb on, say, Nina, and do the same thing. This isn't about the fighting game, at least not to me. I understand DOA is known for its fan service, but to me this is less about the fighting game and just more about the fact that you have to understand, at least in my opinion, you have to understand the nature of the beast, in my personal opinion. Fighting has a sexual component to it. Fighting games have a strong fan service element to them. Mainly regarding the girls, yes, mainly marketed toward men and perhaps some lesbians, but mainly guys, because it's mainly men who play fighting games and mainly men who make fighting games. But yes, there is a fan service element, there is a sexual element. This is part of the nature of the beast. How in the world can you complain or overreact over DOA when, again, you can find similar things in Street Fighter. You can find similar things in Tekken with their wrestler characters. And then there's, of course, as many people have pointed out over the years, just the fact that we as a culture, we in American culture, seem to be okay to an extent. I'm not going to say absolutely, but we do seem to be more okay with violence, with displaying violence, than we are about displaying sexuality. I don't quite know why that is, right? But it tends to be that way. I think there is more to it, but I do have to agree that I do find it a bit odd that we seem to be more comfortable with openly displaying scenes of violence, right? Even gratuitous violence. Not to say that it doesn't get attention. I mean, Mortal Kombat, you know, got attention for its violence long before it became a fan service game, or more fan servicey. It did get noticed for its violence principally, but still, I will admit, I don't quite understand that, why we freak out more over exposed or partially exposed boobs than we do over, you know, say, ripping, you know, Liu Kang's head off. I don't know. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. So TLDR, I think that this is an overreaction, right? I understand maybe cutting away from that. I don't understand cutting the entire stream. It's just somebody being silly. But again, I understand cutting from that or cutting that particular image out because of the sexual connotations. But again, it's wrestling. It's fighting games. It's fan service. There's always going to be an element of that. It's fighting. It's violence. There is something sexual about it. You really can't escape it. So anyway, that's my overwrought opinion on the matter. I think it's an overreaction on Evo's part. But we'll see what happens. I just wanted to just share this and discuss something that was not about Vic M and his situation going on. So I hope everybody has a good night. Goodbye.